Howdy! You're about to watch a trial run of Synthesis Media's Anti-Debate, which is a new and evolving format for debate where participants build off each other's perspectives and in turn co-create a more comprehensive view of the topic of debate. Now, this trial run will give you a pretty good sense of what an anti-debate might sound like, but the format has since evolved. So after you watch this video, to check out the latest format and perhaps host your own anti-debate, go to anti-debate.org. And with that, here we go.
All right, so welcome everyone to our anti-debate on gender-affirming biological interventions. Under what circumstances, if any, should they be made available? I am your host today, Stephanie Leff, and our anti-debaters today will be Layman Pascal and Shereef Bishay. So I'm going to give a little bit of context on our anti-debate topic and a little bit on our goal for today, and then we're going to dive in. So in terms of context on the topic, gender-affirming biological interventions are defined as biological interventions designed to accommodate people who experience discomfort or distress due to a perceived mismatch between their biological sex and their gender identity. There are various types of biological interventions, but we're going to focus on two today that are to some degree irreversible, and those are, or hard to reverse, and those are hormone therapy, which includes estrogen therapy, testosterone therapy, and puberty blockers. And then two, surgical interventions, which include surgery on the chest, genitals, face, body contour, and voice in order to masculinize or feminize. Now, different countries and even different states in the United States have different policies on biological interventions. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of the landscape, the policy landscape, and where Layman and Shereef will situate themselves on the more restrictive end of the spectrum. Some US states, like Alabama, just ban all gender-affirming biological interventions for minors. Adults, they're illegal for adults. They typically need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a healthcare professional, but there's very limited provider availability anyway. On the more permissive end of the spectrum, we have California. Minors can access puberty blockers and hormone therapies with parental consent and the guidance of medical professionals. Surgical interventions are available on a case-by-case basis. And for adults, biological interventions are fully legal and widely accessible. Then equally permissive, but with somewhat more rigorous safeguards, would be the Netherlands. So their biological interventions are also available to minors, but whereas California requires parental consent, the Netherlands also requires a mental health assessment and other safeguards. So we're starting to see the kinds of criteria that Layman and Shereef might use to decide the circumstances in which biological interventions should be available, like age, or parental consent, or mental health. Bigger picture, we might say that the debate about gender-affirming biological interventions is fundamentally about balancing individual autonomy and well-being with, and you might dispute this, but with our societal responsibility to protect vulnerable populations like minors. Now, this tension is especially challenging within the context of countries that have a for-profit healthcare industry, primarily the US, which has some perverse incentives driving it and driving over-medicalization. This tension is also challenging within the context of an internet business model, which is global, that drives poor body image among young people. In terms of our goal for this anti-debate, our goal is not to change minds, but to expand minds. And our goal will be achieved if we all walk away with a more comprehensive understanding of the considerations involved in deciding whether, under the circumstances in which gender-affirming biological interventions should be made available. Our anti-debate will have three phases. Phase one will be establishing the different perspectives. Phase two will be understanding each other's and attempting to integrate each other's perspectives. And then phase three will be exploring the extent to which anything shifted or expanded. So with that, let's dive into phase one. So the way for Layman and Shereef to connect before getting into the content, we're going to give each of them 2 minutes to share a personal story that connects with the issue of gender affirming care or the trans phenomenon more broadly. And Shereef, we are going to start with your personal story. You have 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Um, okay. A few years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
This story has been removed to protect the privacy of the individual involved.
Okay. Thank you, Shereef. Thank you for your open-hearted share. All right, Layman, I'm actually going to give you 3 minutes because that's what I ended up giving Shereef. So you have 3 minutes. Over to you.
Okay. Years ago, I was having lunch at a Japanese restaurant in Victoria, and I remember going out on the street a little bit tipsy from the sake, and the gay pride parade had just come by, and I could see them receding into the distance, and there was glitter and balloons on the street, and I remember picking a balloon up and just having this emotional clarity that as much silliness and bizarre thinking and to some degree grotesquerie that I always sort of observed in these events, that paled in comparison to people putting their livelihoods and lives on the line to stand for a more complicated, more vital, more humane, more colorful, more diverse kind of world situation. I thought, oh, I have gay pride. I have pride in all of the ludicrously named LGBTQ plus community. And I feel like what those communities need should be something that primarily the people in those communities tell us and not something that we tell them. I don't know a lot of trans people, but all the ones I know tell me they, by and large, feel more effective, more true to themselves, better as people, and the degree to which they've modified their physical reality to suit their ideas and their feelings and their souls and their sense of themselves. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. And that there's risks and that there's confusion, but that it's okay to take those kinds of risks, within reason. And I even feel like there's maybe some special role for people like this. In my science fiction imagination, I imagine a world where mature versions of people who've gone through this can be sources of gender and identity and wisdom for the rest of the population, even if the rest of the population is the heteronormative majority or any other weird, still emerging variations of human sexuality and gender that's just going to keep getting stranger and more diverse and more transformative as we go forward as a species.
All right, beautiful. Thank you, Layman. All right, so now we're going to move on to, now that we kind of have a little bit more insight into each other's like inner relationship with this issue, we're going to move on to opening statements, and you will want to really listen to each other's opening statements because afterwards you'll have the opportunity to give a rebuttal. So Layman, since you're arguing in the affirmative, or I guess I changed it from a yes or no to, since you're arguing for a more permissive approach, we could say, to gender affirming biological interventions, we're going to start with you. You are going to have 3 minutes to give your opening statement. So the floor is yours.
Uh, Numerous states in the United States allow 13-year-olds to consent to sex and therefore also to the radical life-altering condition of pregnancy. Many of them let kids drive at 15 or 16 when vehicular fatalities are a leading cause of adolescent death. So I kind of start from the position that our current American laws around age limits are erratic and often hypocritical and definitely permit various dangerous life altering risks for people under 18, who obviously could also be at different levels of maturity and self awareness and cognitive stability and life experience. So, under what conditions should gender affirming biological interventions be legal? The answer for me is probably not just under the circumstance that they've turned 18. And obviously, some gender affirming biological interventions are only really viable if they occur earlier in life. And that once the body restructuring hormones of puberty set in, there's a cascading set of changes that make it more difficult and more dangerous to alter than it would have been earlier. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we can have the fickle, unformed brains of young children deciding to restructure their bodies on a whim. That's not the circumstance. And we can't assume that just because a person feels ambiguity and complexity about their sexual identity in ways that don't line up easy with stereotypes, that it would be obviously better for them in the long run to switch genders. That's also not the circumstance. But there must be some circumstances, and they seem to be very open circumstances for me. Human beings all have genetic and anatomical and neurohormonal and social layers of sexual identity, and when those don't align, it can cause non-trivial ongoing distress. So for me, the circumstance in which we start moving toward biological and chemical interventions is when a child repeatedly, over an extended period, confesses to a mismatch between these layers, and when caring parents or guardians, by observation and trust in the child, are open to this, and when a competent non-ideological psychologist confirms it as plausible in distinction to other conditions that might look similar, and when a knowledgeable doctor agrees the procedures are relatively safe or feasible. And if there are disagreements or new discoveries in that process, then we have review boards, we have oversight of some kind to make adjudications for particular circumstances. But basically, we use a set of rational verification procedures like other civilized countries. That's the circumstance. But in a way, for me, it's almost like it's a mistake to think about circumstances. The real question is not when or under what condition. The real question is who. Or these are complex and difficult decisions, and the issue is whether complex, difficult decisions should be made for you by the government, according to an arbitrary rule usually crafted by people who are not directly involved, or whether complex, difficult decisions should be made by individuals and families in consultation with experts. That's sort of my starting position.
Awesome. That was exactly 3 minutes. Well done, Layman. All right, thank you. Shereef, you now have 3 minutes to give your opening statement. So go for it.
Thank you, Layman. That was awesome. I have a legal argument and a medical argument for my position. On the legal argument front, we don't allow minors to alter their bodies in our country. We don't allow them to get a tattoo. We don't allow them to chop a limb off if they feel like that limb doesn't belong in them. It's illegal for us to make permanent decisions about minors' bodies, even if parents consent. We do not allow female genital mutilation, even if the parents' religion allows it. We assume that in respect of the do no harm policy, we say the autonomy of the child is not complete until they are of 18. Admittedly, an arbitrary age. Admittedly, there are very mature 15-year-olds and very immature 24-year-olds. But it is our attempt to say, you get to make your own decisions for your life, and you're only fully capable of doing that after a certain level of maturity, which we approximate with age. There's probably a better way to assess maturity, but to make a law for 300 million people, it's a decent enough approximation. On the medical front, I would say at the heart of gender-affirming care is this idea that human beings have a thing called gender that is different than their sex. This idea is shared with according to the Pew Center research, 60% of Americans believe that gender and sex are the same thing. You can't change your gender. And 40% of Americans believe that you can have a gender that's different than your sex. So you can really look at this as almost a religious or spiritual belief that we have some essence in us, maybe a soul or some essential aspect of us that has a sex that could be different from the sex of our body. And a huge percentage of Americans believe that, and a huge percentage of Americans don't believe that. But there's no scientific evidence for a sexed soul. That's not to say it doesn't exist. I believe in God. There's no scientific evidence that God exists. I have experiences of a soul. There's no scientific evidence of that. So I'm not saying that human beings necessarily don't have a gender. I'm saying we don't have the science to point to that. And if we don't have the science to point to that, we cannot use medicine. It could be maybe a ritual. We can argue maybe for a religious ritual that we allow, but it cannot be a medical procedure because we don't have the science that points to gender.
All right, thank you, Shereef. On to rebuttals. So Layman, we're going to go back to you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you. Um, there are a broad class of voluntary modifications to bodies that we don't let children do, uh, sometimes even with parental consent, but there are still a large class that we do allow. We allow all kinds of hormone-altering foods to be consumed freely. We allow all kinds of medications to be taken, even when we know there's huge side effects that can be fatal or permanent in taking those medications. And yes, we don't have a standing piece of medical evidence that says there's an inherent gendered soul. But at the same time, socially, we move forward on all kinds of medical science that is not completely resolved. Right? There's lots of uncertainties and lots of ambiguities in what we think of as medical science. And we accept some of those risks and we don't accept others. And I would look not so much at the bigger question of whether there's an inherent gender, but whether there's, as I mentioned before, a mismatch between different layers of a person. I think you don't have to have a female soul to have a female neurohormonal pattern, and that's something we might be able to determine medically, just as we could determine that a body has this or that anatomy and also has this or that chromosomal set. And I don't think there's any reason why we can't have all of those layers operating in tandem with each other. So if someone goes into a hospital, we can say, yeah, if we're operating on you genetically, we need to know your chromosomes. If we're operating on your body, we need to know your anatomy. If we're dealing with you as a social person, we need to know how you want to be thought of as a social person. And all of those seem to be very complementary in my mind. I don't know if that's a strong rebuttal or not, but it's what came up for me.
Sweet. Over to you, Shereef.
No, I really appreciate what you just said, and I agree with it. If we're operating on you biologically, we need to know what your biological essence is. And if we're operating on you social emotionally, we need to know how, part of what we need to know is how you perceive yourself socially emotionally. But we are discussing operating on you biologically, not operating on you socially emotionally. When I operate, if I'm dealing with Peter or Steph or you, I do, part of me interacting with you socially emotionally is needing to know how you see yourself. And we negotiate that. We negotiate your identity as an individual in society. That's a negotiation. But if we're talking about a medical, biological operation, there's no negotiation of your social identity here. Medicine concerns itself with your biological well-being, unless you're talking about mental health, in which case we do sometimes have physical interventions for mental health, but that's very rare that we chop off a part of the body or change a part of the body. And historically, it's been really bad news when we've tried to take care of people's mental health by changing their body physically. But, you know, lobotomies and bloodletting and all kinds of things that we try to do historically to alter somebody's mental health by physically changing their body permanently. And none of them have stayed. And I don't think we right now have any evidence that that is the best way to address the mental health of a person.
Okay, so I'm actually going to let us open it up to a little bit of just kind of general unstructured debate, but I'm going to plant a couple kind of like questions there seem to be kind of two areas of disagreement. One is obviously around the circumstances in which people can receive these gender affirming biological interventions. And Layman is saying that he thinks there absolutely can be safeguards that are put in place, and that can also apply to minors. Shereef, I'm curious if for you that you would draw the line only at age, or if there are any circumstances in which you would allow minors, and or if there are other things besides age where you would draw the line. And then the other kind of area that we could theoretically maybe explore is this, whether it even matter, whether we need there to be a difference between sex and gender. Does that even matter? Can it be levels of a person that don't match? For what Layman is saying, is it really just kind of contextual? It's like whatever we need to know about you or however we want to define you really depends on the circumstance and what we're trying to achieve in that circumstance, whether it's surgery or sports or something else. So I'm just gonna throw that out there and open it up to y'all for a couple minutes.
I think, Layman, I think one of the things that I appreciate in your opening statement is like I have so many shared values with you. Like there's so much that I think is none of the government's business. Like so much. We're way over, right? And this beautiful expression you have, like this transmission you gave of just like the explosive potential and diversity of our roles and how we express as humans. Like I got gay pride just for you saying I have gay pride. It's like, yes, like this is us. We're crazy, It's wild. And I really do appreciate that. But I think the thing that kept coming to my mind over and over is we don't allow female genital mutilation in this country. It's illegal. But you could argue that there are a strong devout Muslim family that sees female sexuality as impure, and it's called that in Egypt. It's called impure, and it sees circumcision when it happens at the age 6 or 7 or 8 for a girl as we call tathir, or purification. And literally, that girl feels better because she's starting to have sexual feelings. In her mind, those are impure. When her clitoris is cut off, she's like, I am now pure. There's belonging ceremonies. She wears different clothes. She feels better in society. There's a limit for us of saying, oh, this belief system and how this person feels and how her parents feel and how our society works. There's a no here, which is to say, we want to give this girl the chance to, after the age of 18, decide whether or not she wants to have an orgasm in her life or not. And we don't get to decide that for her at the age of 11 or 12, even if it makes her feel better, even if her belief system and everything around her convinces her this will make her feel better. Can you see the perspective from what if we're wrong about gender being a thing? What if we're as wrong about that as this devout Muslim family is about purity being a thing related to cutting off your clit?
Yeah, there's when I feel into what the dangers are here, right? Part of the danger is people being deluded or misguided psychologically, and the other danger is being part of a social pocket where it turns out people's values are such that they sabotage the general complexity and functionality of a human unit. So in order for any of this to work, we have some kind of reasonable trust that the expertise that would be brought to bear is an expertise that stands outside of and straddles different kinds of value systems, that takes a lot of things into account, that isn't caught in some particular thing, and that overall, like all things being equal, sort of favors non-intervention, right? I think in general, we don't want to intervene in people's bodies as a general rule. Even a lot of things we do in terms of medicating children for what we perceive as psychological problems, a lot of that should probably not be done because there's a huge amount of complexity in the unfolding of the system and a huge ability for it to interestingly resolve a lot of its own internal tensions. But then there are specific circumstances where we say, well, there's a particular pattern of distress here, and we think that we have some tools that can resolve that, and we think that the people who've evaluated it are of a reasonably high caliber, that the gamble that they're making is one that's worth taking. So I would say, like, not as a general rule for people, but if there's some specific source of distress and we have some reason to think that this actually adjusts that distress and the parties involved actually want it, and an expert who doesn't appear to be ideologically captured by a particular cultural pool sort of says, yeah, that fits our analysis of the situation. Under those conditions, I wouldn't want to come in and say, as an outsider, I know what's best for you. I would want to say, like, there's something within all of that system that is going to know more about it than I could know as an outside determiner.
Okay, I appreciate that. So you're valuing some deference to expertise and some autonomy, like you're saying, I want to respect the system in and of itself, right?
Mhm.
And so, but in that system, you're saying a non-ideologically captured expert. How do we determine that?
Right, that's a relative measure, but we make relative measures like that across the rest of our society, right? And it's problematic, right? If we look at our Supreme Court, ideally, they're not ideologically captured. Obviously, we see that that can happen, but that's part of the ongoing creative negotiation for how we set up institutions and structures in society. We're trying to get a more objective take, and sometimes that's going to fail. But we can't necessarily take the fact that it could fail as a blanket right to refuse the possibilities of these interventions in cases where people seem to really want and need them.
Right. When you say that, there's nothing you're saying that I disagree with. In this hypothetical world where there are non-ideologically captured experts and where the bias is towards non-intervention and non-medicalization and trusting the body, and where everybody's included and there's a holistic decision being made, in this fantastical world, which I love, I share with you. I want that world. It would be none of my business to come in. It would be not the government's business to come in and say, um, it would be the government's business to make sure that those conditions are available for the child before we alter their body permanently, right? We would say we have to make sure somehow you're not ideologically captured, you're leaning towards non-intervention, like you said.
In
But these are
that
not.
world, could minors get biological interventions in that fantastical world? Just as a way of trying to identify where the what
Yes,
contours of the
and
disagreement.
these
Yeah,
because in
minor.
this fantastical world, I'm not the expert. There is another expert, and it's not on me. But we would call this non-ideological expertise. The best word we have for it right now is science.
Okay.
And we just don't have the word. That's not the world we live in right now, where the people doing the science are not ideologically captured. There's just
Yeah.
such diversity in what studies are showing. Very few longitudinal studies, and then the results are so starkly opposing that there's just nowhere near consensus on these interventions.
Well, on that note, I'm going to throw in some statistics and like a little more material for you to work with. But I think it's probably easy enough for maybe you to say that you would agree on making this available in this fantastical world in which people are, like we're all good incentives that are shaping the healthcare industry, and that these individuals are making these like very sovereign choices. But granted, we live in the world that we live in. So just a few statistics, and I'm just going to preface this with like, I didn't fully research this stuff. This is still kind of just like, for the trial purposes, but a couple things. So biological interventions are actually very rare. It's a very small, it's so fewer than 0.01% of transgender teens are getting gender affirming surgeries, as an example. So we're actually talking about a very, very small population. The data from my limited, is that regret is relative is low. 1% regret rate for trans individuals who underwent gender affirming surgeries. Granted, our academies has perverse, so take this all with a grain of like, we know the incentives that are driving the healthcare and academic worlds, but let's just throw some things out there. The data shows that mental health improves. So transgender youth who received hormone therapy were 60% less likely to experience moderate to severe depression, 73% less likely to experience suicidal ideation compared to those who did not receive it. That's from JAMA, which is the main kind of medical journal in the United States. The approach seems to be getting more new, like different states and countries' approaches are getting more rigorous, for like more and more safeguards are being put in place in terms of like parental consent and like multiple medical opinions, etc. And that, but there does seem to be some kind of, I'm just going to call it a social contagion going on, where, for example, the incidence of gender affirming vasectomy among minors increased 13-fold from 3.7 to 47.7. What, I don't need to say the numbers, but the point is, the point is there does seem to be some kind of a significant growth in this population that is considering itself trans and asking for this kind of medication, which raises questions. I'm just gonna throw a couple other things out there for you all to, and that is the criteria that could be used to draw the line. We have been talking about age, but there are other ones. So I'm going to just kind of riff through them and see where you land in terms of agreement or disagreement. So there are generally kind of, I'm going to call them 4 categories of criteria. The first is around the patient's capacity to make an informed and voluntary choice, right? Which includes their age, mental competence, being informed of all available care options, making decisions without coercion. So that's kind of one category. Then there's a category around the condition itself, such as the duration of the gender dysphoria. And I would also include their medical fitness for certain treatments. And I'll put this up on the screen in a second, but I'm just going to kind of lay it out. The third category is around the extent to which the context is conducive, which includes things like support systems from family and friends, access to ongoing care, and cultural and social considerations. And then the final category is just around kind of like proper process, for example, including parental consent and getting recommendations from multiple health professionals. So let me actually put these on the screen so you can see them. So I'm curious, laying those out, if that helps you draw the line more like specifically around where the circumstances in which, here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
There we go. So I'm gonna, open it up. That's a
Okay.
lot, actually.
Well,
Yeah,
I noticed,
go ahead.
so this is what I noticed, Layman, as Stephanie was talking, and I'm curious if you can run this thought experiment with me, which is, actually, I can't see anybody's faces now, unfortunately, but it would help me, Steph, if you can, yeah, thank you. This is what I'm, as Steph, I noticed my mind doing this, and maybe you can help me with that, but what my mind was doing was comparing, okay, I'm going to try and find a way to actually see your face while I do this. Give me a second. I apologize.
I can also just take it off the screen.
Oh, okay. Now I can see his face. Great. I grew up in Egypt, and about 40% of the women I dated had female genital mutilation because that's the religious practice. And it was terrible for them. You know, it was a really intense thing to happen. And so every time, everything Stephanie's saying, I'm running against this mental experiment in my mind of, would this apply to the practice of FGM? You know, there's cultural support. There are experts who say it's good for you. There is a sense of the child wanting that in order to fit in and to feel better about herself. There's all of these things apply to FGM. And so the circumstances I need for this to be legal would have to not apply to FGM in Egypt. Does that make sense? And so that's because maybe all of us here would agree that that should be illegal. Maybe we don't, but I'm assuming agreement between you and I that FGM should be illegal. And so just because we're culturally captured, because 40% of us believe that gender and sex are different, we need to be very careful. So I would want to apply the same circumstances. What I really liked about the set of conditions you laid out is that it would make FGM illegal, particularly because you said a non-ideologically captured expert. That would make FGM illegal in Egypt. And so of all the conditions of all the things you just listed, Steph, they would apply to a religious girl having her genitals mutilated. She would feel better. She would fit better in society. There would be support around her. There would be affirming, nurturing love and like pride in what she's done and what's going on with her life. And it's like all of these things would fit. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it okay even if it works for 95% of girls, right? And so I'm just using this as a, will we in 100 years look back and say, wow, that was a mistake, right? It has to not apply to this.
Mhm. You know, that's an excellent point. And yeah, I think you're right that, um, I mean, essentially, it's the type and quality of the expertise that's at question, right? And in this fantastical world where there's very competent, very knowledgeable, very sympathetic, non-idealistically captured experts of some kind, then we could count on that. The question is sort of whether we live in such a world or not. because I think that the distinction that we would need to make is precisely around that. And I think that is, emotionally for me, that's the hardest part of this to figure out, which is how do you mm, safeguard individual autonomy in the short term and the long term against ideological forces in the society. And I think those ideological forces can come from several different angles. Like one is people who think they're experts on what would be good for you, but they actually are strongly loyal to some particular system that isn't really based in human well-being. Another one is that we have an ideological hesitancy about novelty, right? And then we say, well, we haven't traditionally made biological interventions, but it hasn't traditionally been the case that we could, that a lot of these processes are extremely new, which is a reason to be cautious, but also we can't necessarily use the instincts that were developed for a time period when we didn't have these tools at our disposal, that might be misleading us collectively ideologically. And I don't say it's present in this conversation, but in the broader social conversation, a kind of reactive feeling towards non-standard sexuality clearly drives a lot of the conversations against trans and against these interventions. And so I'm trying to think, well, how do we sort of safeguard the well-being of individuals, like I said, at the moment and also in the long term against at least those three broad ideological forces? And I'm not sure what the answer is. When I think of experts, I know that they can be mistaken, they can be deluded, they can have overt or covert allegiances to non rational things. But at the same time, I have to trust them in a lot of affairs. I have to trust them when I get on a plane. There's a lot of areas where I don't want to trust them, but I have no choice, and society seems to function okay. So I don't know exactly where to draw that line between the skepticism and the anti-fragility of living individuals against experts who we can't verify as perfectly reasonable and non-ideologically captured, and where we have to live in a world where that risk is present anyway, and how do we give people as much freedom as we can under those conditions?
Okay, sorry, I'm going to take a time out for a sec because I'm debating, anti-debating, haha, where to go next. Because it seems like we have some clarity around the like it seems like you're both actually agreeing that you would draw the line around the layman, as you called it, the type and quality of expertise. And if you had that expertise, then you would draw the line in the same place. And if you didn't have that expertise, actually, I'm not sure. If you didn't, the fact that we don't have that expertise, I think you still don't draw the line in the same place. But the next thing we would do is, and I think we probably still should, is we're gonna steelman each other's perspectives. We're gonna red team our own, i.e., we're gonna like plug holes in each other's, like try to make each other stronger, poke holes in our own, try to make like kind of see where our own holes are, and then attempt an integration. How does that still sound as the direction to go in? It seems like there's
Sure.
more I mean, I think you're just clarifying, yeah, where your disagreement is. So I think it's still perhaps worth
I,
doing
I
these
could
things.
probably, I could probably, I could probably use a few more minutes of hearing Layman articulate something in particular that I still want to know.
Okay,
Sure.
go, yeah,
I
ask a question and then
need
we'll
to
go into
understand.
steel manning, but I'm gonna cut us off like in like 3 minutes so
Okay.
that we have
Yeah.
time to,
I
yeah.
think the part that I would love your expounding on a little bit more is what do you actually think right now the should be legal, knowing like in your best assessment of our expertise around gender affirming care, um, do you feel like we're close to that non-ideological expertise, or do you feel like we should default to it being legal? The default should be legal. The default should be like liberty until something's proven. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I of the examples Steph gave at the beginning, I think I'm closest to the Netherlands position, which is I think the default should be legality under the conditions of several steps of verification from different kinds of experts, and what I see now, I'm looking around in a particular cultural pool, I see reasonably successful outcomes, right, in terms of the transgender people I run into. But that would change maybe in a different cultural pool, like the one you're talking about with female genital mutilation, or if there was a compounding set of outcomes that looked like the expertise was clearly not working and that people were mostly wrecked downstream of that process. But I would default to the maximum amount of individual and family liberty under conditions of informed expertise. You-
Do you feel clear on that, Shereef?
Yes, thank you. I do.
Okay, we are going to move into phase two with a word from our sponsor. Does your mattress, just kidding. Okay, so moving into phase two. So now that you've kind of clarified your own perspectives, you're going to be challenged to steelman each other's perspectives. So one at a time, you will each articulate such a strong version of the other person's perspective that it might convince even you. And I want to be really clear. I'm not asking you to like pick out the parts of each other's position that you like the best or editorialize. Like you're actually speaking your opponent's perspective as if it's your own, and then ideally strengthening it in some way. And then your opponent will have a chance to correct anything you didn't get right. So, Shereef, let's start with you. You have 2 minutes to steelman Layman's perspective. Go for it.
Sure. Layman, I feel like the values that I heard you express most deeply, one is
Sorry, I'm gonna cut you off. So this is like in first person. Like,
oh, in first person.
well, you don't have to say like I, but it's more like you just like speak it.
Just speak it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the human condition is so varied and rich and emerging and always evolving and so mysterious. And we need a complex and nuanced way of supporting this incredible array of humanity that we have. And our understanding of it is changing day by day and on a case by case basis. And the issue of gender is so rich and complicated, and the role of transgender people is mysterious and in some ways emerging. And it is our role to put together a group of experts who are non-ideologically captured, parents who are ideally have the child's best health and well-being, and a holistic approach to them, not seeing them just as bodies or just as genders or just as spirit or just as psychology, but an understanding of the multiple layers of their humanity. And it's none of the government's business to make something illegal that a group of experts and a socially cohesive, intelligent unit is making for a child, including that child's awareness of themselves. Maturity is age is an arbitrary way to determine maturity or to determine self-knowledge or self-diagnosis. And it's really not the government's place. If all these things exist, it's harmful to make that illegal.
Awesome. Layman, what do you think? Is there anything you feel like Shereef didn't get?
Mm, no, I found that very plausible.
Awesome. Well done. All right, Layman, over to you.
You
You
should also be careful
have
of people's bias towards conservatism and hidden kind of sex phobia and puritanical values. We should also be careful of how that can leak into our decision making around what's legal and what's not.
Yeah, thank you.
cool.
I
All right,
feel
Layman.
like there is um, such complexity and possibility in a human being that all things being equal, we have to err on the side of protecting the ability of that natural complexity to unfold to maturity, to adulthood, to some reasonable standard of autonomy. And that direct biological and physical interventions in their bodies from which there's really no going back, that crosses a line in terms of allowing them to unfold in whatever ambiguity and richness and confusion and internal contradictions might be there, that protecting that legally, even if we're using an arbitrary age cutoff of some kind, that all things considered, that's a better solution than allowing interventions when those interventions are going to be inevitably at least partly sourced in that person's own confused psychology and in the biased cultural backgrounds and social pools in which that person exists, even if they give themselves trappings of expertise. Um, so that essentially, even though it's imperfect, the safest and best thing we can do is to protect people from their own distorted thinking and from the distorted thinking of the population around them, up and until we have some strong medical scientific evidence that there really is a gender that's different from your body type, and we don't currently have that evidence.
How was that, Shereef?
That was way better than mine.
Well done. If we had more time, I would want to yeah, actually ask you how it felt to hear each other and get into that a little more. But I'm going to keep moving us along. So, yeah, so now you have attempted to kind of plug holes in each other's case, let's say, and now you're gonna poke holes in your own. So one at a time, you will have the opportunity to answer one of the following questions. I'm going to put them up on the screen, but I'm just going to read them out loud so you can kind of start thinking about which one you might want to answer. Okay. What evidence would it take to change my position? Under what circumstances does my position not apply? What are the failure modes or unintended consequences of my position? What elements of my position are not falsifiable? And which of my opponent's points do I have no adequate rebuttal to? So I'm going to put these up on the screen. Oops.
Much time
And
for this one?
how much time? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Let's give you 2 minutes. But I'm also I'm keeping track of time, but also if I'm letting you go over if it feels like you need it. So, okay. Can you see the questions?
Yeah.
Okay, Layman, let's start with you. Choose whichever one you want.
Sure.
And then go for it.
I'm interested in what evidence it would take to change my position, and I can think of sort of two things that might fall into that category. I think if there was overwhelming statistical evidence that people downstream of these interventions generally regretted it, felt terrible, were worse off psychologically and emotionally than before, I think that would be, beyond a certain threshold of those sorts of outcomes, that would be enough probably to change my mind. Or if there were some new medical discovery that showed there was some other kind of pathology in the neurobiological system that created the side effect of feeling a mismatch between these different levels in ourselves, I think I could be persuaded to change my mind on that basis.
Awesome. That was fast. All right. Shereef, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, I like the first question and the third one. I would say for the first one, I think if there was scientific existence of ontological gender, like that's an actual, like Layman was saying, there's certain neuronal pathways we've discovered or an energetic system that we've discovered, and in most cases it correlates with the sex, but in some cases it doesn't. Then that would definitely change my position. Like, oh, we actually have scientific pointing to this thing that people say they feel, which I'm assuming people's feelings would precede something ontological all of the time. So we may just be behind scientifically. The failure mode, I guess that's similar to the failure mode, is that my position is behind because science is an imperfect tool of perceiving reality, and human beings have a vaster experience. And so the failure mode is we're depending on science to make laws, but people's experience is better than science at detecting reality, which I believe to be true. The other failure mode would be the two mental experiments I'm running is, would my decision matrix work for making FGM illegal? And would it work in a time of homophobia to make, welcoming gay people into society legal and fine? And so if the way that if the way I'm making these decisions to take the position wouldn't work, if this was similar to just homophobia 100 years ago or 50 years ago or today? Is this just another phobia that is programmed, and then we're just coming up with evidence to support it?
That's a great test. I love that test. All right. I'm going to move us along as much as I feel like I want to linger, but that's already a lesson that I've learned, is that this actually needs more time. Well, I guess, do either of you want to respond? No, I'm going to move us along. Sorry. You probably do. Okay. So we're going to shift into, well, you're going to kind of get to, because we're going to shift into unstructured open dialogue for a couple minutes now and just explore how you might integrate your different perspectives. So again, I'm going to read some questions, just 3 questions aloud, and then I'm going to put them on the screen just as like fodder that might help you kind of see where you might integrate. So one is there an either or that can be flipped to a both and? Is there an opportunity to shift from what's better, X or Y, to under what circumstances, if any, is X or Y justified or useful? And then, and you've already started getting into this, to what extent are there perverse incentives that drive the quote unquote gender affirming care industry, so to speak, such that if those incentives were alleviated, it would help alleviate the debate? Congratulations, you totally already got there. Okay, I'm going to put these up on the screen and then just let y'all flow.
It's a little bit tricky since we began with under what circumstances.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you've identified some lines that you seem to kind of draw in the same place. Like, Layman, how do you feel about the threading the needle between genital mutilation and gay rights? Like, is that, is that a line that you would draw in the same place? And well, and
Probably
I guess,
pretty
Shereef, had
similar.
you ever thought of that until today? Is that something you had already been using as a heuristic?
I came up with it when I was arguing with Layman in my head over the last few days.
Oh, nice. Okay. The
Yeah.
benefits of even before the anti-debate begins.
It's like
Uh-huh.
it's like just what criteria would have appreciated if our ancestors had used?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a sense, generally, emotionally for me, there's a sense that um, wanting to overcome homophobia, wanting to stand with trans people, and being opposed to female genital mutilation are all part of the same polarity. They're all part of the same values move. And I act as though that's the case, but it's not 100% sure that that is the case, right? There could be situations in which those things turn out to not be part of the same move. And I think this analogy to female genital mutilation is a very serious challenge to all this sort of thinking.
Is there anything either of you can say about, yeah, what it would, what a healthcare professional would have to like exhibit in order to kind of qualify as not ideologically captured? If we can kind of drill down on that line.
Mhm.
No, but I feel like when Layman when you mentioned that, I felt sad ever since. Like there's this kind of like, where are the experts I can trust? You know,
Yeah, yeah.
like that's what I'm left with. I don't know if this fits on this slide or not, Steph, but there's some like, God, yes, it would fucking solve everything. You're right. Like, um,
It does fit on the slide, by the way, because we're seeing where you meet, and it seems
yeah,
like you meet there, although it's hard to. It's like the name of the Theoval Tao is not the eternal. It's like the second you try to like put some criteria on the healthcare, it's a shifting. But I think something maybe you could, one very simple thing that at least comes to mind for me is like, if this health professional has said yes and no in different situations and has like a logic for that. Like if you ask this person under what circumstances should a young person not get, biological interventions, and the person says none, well, then that person is probably not someone you can really trust. But if they have some at least like thought out logic for when, if they have the
I think it's
circumstances.
a necessary but not sufficient condition, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I would say they would have to not believe that gender and sex are different. Like if a criteria for you,
Why?
because then you're not making it based on a religious belief, but on a scientific. You're not making the medical decision based on a.
But can't religious beliefs coexist with sound
Of course,
scientific
religious
practice?
beliefs can coexist, but if you have the opposing religious belief and that you're still sometimes able to make the right medical decision, then I would trust you more.
Hmm. Okay,
I
so
would
it's not
trust
a
somebody more if there was a certain amount of complexity in their thinking, which I think we're all saying. Like, I would be very suspicious of the expertise of someone who was sort of essentialist in any regard. If they were to say, right, there is only this gender and you are this, or you are not that and you are secretly really only this, that both of those are too narrow and too totalizing. I would want to hear from them that they understand that it's a more complex, multifarious, and sometimes circumstantially dependent decision. One thing that came up for me looking at that list is like I'm not sure we can really think about this topic as a single set of values and solutions. It's like there has to be at least two, right? Because we're always going to be in a situation where uh, you can never perfectly trust the experts. The experts, if they were the right experts, would solve this situation. But to what degree are you in a situation where you can trust that expertise? So there has to be one set of values and solutions, which is how do we try to encourage that to be the case? And another set of values and solutions where how do we act to protect and preserve our and further ourselves when we don't know that that's the case? And I'm not sure that either of those can be removed, right? So if there's a both and, it's that you have to have at least those two conclusions in mind.
I really like that. I also think there's another both and that I'm seeing here, which is um, if you had somebody who was religiously believed, like let's say a panel of experts, half of them religiously believe gender and sex are the exact same thing, and half of them believe that you can absolutely have a different gender than your sex, right? Which would roughly approximate the US population. And they all agree on a medical intervention, I would trust that medical intervention. If I had a fundamental Christian doctor who believes abortion should be illegal, and a fully progressive doctor who believes it should be legal all the way through second term, and they're both deciding what's the health of the mother and the baby here, and they both have the same decision, I trust that health decision. So I would
a
want,
great criterion.
yeah, I would actually want either one person with a complex. I would actually trust more a fundamentalist panel that's like like our Supreme Court. Like if there's consensus, that I would say that would be a condition for medical, like permanent medical intervention on minors.
Cool. Anything I'm like, this is like the juiciest part of the conversation, but I am gonna move us along unless Layman, did you have something else you wanted to say on that? I feel like we're drawing some really great lines
No, we can
here.
move along.
Okay. I didn't I didn't get to write down what you said, Layman, first with the two but I think I really liked it. But it seems like yeah, we're getting some good stuff here. Okay. So I am gonna, yeah, in the interest of time, we've talked about the issue of biological interventions kind of like out there. We've talked about each other's perspectives like in there. And so we're going to take a moment to kind of explore what's going on in here internally. So one at a time, I'm going to just ask you both how you're feeling right now. How's your mood, your breath, your heartbeat, emotions, as well as any sensations in your body. So, Shereef, we'll start with you. How are you feeling right now?
Um, I have mixed feelings. I feel sad. Like there's a sorrow. Um, I feel a little scared. It started happening when Layman was talking about just like that expert that we don't have. Um, yeah, like oh, where are the adults? Like I need some adults. That's kind of the sense is like I want. Um, there's a kind of a thirst and a hunger for more. I'm like, oh, can I have the day with you guys? Like, can we can we get into it? You know, yeah. So I have a kind of a wanting more feeling. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
I
thank
definitely
you.
feel like as interesting as this is, Shereef and I need the whole afternoon hanging out in order to get somewhere really interesting with this. I feel, I mean, by and large, kind of cheery and excited. I like the process more or less. I feel active in my heart and in my solar plexus, but I also feel a kind of a sobriety around the appreciation of the really personal and dangerous edges of this. I feel like part of me is still sitting with the problem from Sharif's opening story, right? Just how sad it is not to be able to have that ongoing relationship with somebody, as well as the just atrocious things going on in the world around female genital mutilation and things like that. There's so many places where this doesn't seem like a friendly intellectual discussion even touches it. So that the weight of that is with me.
All right, thank you both. Um, I love that you want to hang out. That's the same thing happened yesterday. If, if what this does is help people like hang out and talk through things in person, I think that's great. Anyway, all righty, on to phase three. So we're going to start our final phase of this anti-debate with some silent contemplation, just to give you, Layman and Shereef, a chance to kind of reflect and prepare your closing statements. And then all of you out there in the audience, a chance to also reflect on the extent to which, if at all, this experience has expanded or complexified, if that's even a word, your thinking about gender affirming biological interventions. So, Layman and Shereef, I'm going to put some questions up on the screen that are the questions I'm going to ask you to answer in your closing statement. But let's just give ourselves a minute. I wish I could play some music, but if I play it on my computer, you can't hear it anyway. So we'll just make it silent.
And now we're going to skip through the silent contemplation, although, of course, you are welcome to pause.
All righty. So, Shereef and Layman, you will now each have the opportunity to give your closing statement, which is actually, I would consider it almost like a re-articulation of your opening statement, but with those elements that were up on the screen. What did you learn from the other person? How would you expand your opening statement to include what you learned? And is there anything you're going to do differently in terms of how you talk about this issue or otherwise? So, Shereef, since Layman went first with the opening statement, we're going to start with you. And you have 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm most impacted by the arrogance of making something illegal. There's something about the um, in both your communication, Layman, and your articulation of your position. There's a humility and a belief in a possibility that it feels like the abrupt kind of tool. It is illegal under 18 to do that. Like there's something that's like what? That's not really um, congruent with the richness of our humanity and the complexity of the situation. It's like you're bringing a meat cleaver to a surgical, delicate dance. And what are you doing with that tool? That's the wrong tool for the job. So there is some way that I want to take this position with more humility and more it's like a very temporary position rather than a permanent one, and a very like for now until like it's like a okay holding pattern. We don't yet have the scalpel sanitized, you know, and we know that this is the wrong tool for the job, but we need and we're cooking a better tool. It's that's kind of where I'm standing with it. It's like this is not a solution. This is a band-aid. Um, yeah. Yeah, I feel my position feels a lot more temporary. I would make the argument that for now, I would say I would include the word for now after every sentence. Yeah.
That's awesome. All the integral people in the crowd are cheering. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Shereef. Layman, over to you.
Uh, yeah, I would agree with the for now. I think one thing that really stood out to me was the sense that all of this is dependent upon the state of our scientific understanding, and that is changing and can change, and we have to be prepared to rethink things and possibly be wrong as that moves forward. I was struck by, even though my mind initially went to, how do we bring expertise and collective decision making into these decisions? Um, Sharif's sense of just how important it would be to resolve this, to have the expertise we can trust, and how sad it is that we don't necessarily have that expertise. I feel like I learned something from that emotional quality, and that if I was rewriting my opening statement, I would have to lean into what I said a few minutes ago about there being kind of two different solution sets to this, right? On the one hand, how do we organize a system that requires expertise and cultivates the expertise that we would need so that we can count on it? And what kind of decisions do we have to make in a world where we can't necessarily count on that expertise? So there'd be at least two sets of positions in my opening statement. Um, I think I probably didn't put enough emphasis on the element of uh, being cautionary, being anti-fragile, trying to preserve structures that we do have under conditions where we can't trust the systems that we're a part of necessarily. That even though where I live, I see generally good outcomes, that doesn't mean there would be generally good outcomes under all conditions. And even though I think to some degree we have to give individuals liberty to take risks with themselves and their lives and their bodies. Those risks can be huge, and I'm probably a little bit biased towards a futurist positivism. And so I would, in my thinking going forward, um, just counterweight that with just one more ounce of sobriety and caution.
Awesome. Thank you. Right. With that, I want to thank you so much, Layman and Shereef, for your deep, thoughtful engagement on this issue, and congratulate you for an anti-debate that I think we all won. At least for me, I'm walking away with definitely a more nuanced understanding of, for now, like current world, fantastical world, threading the needle between genital mutilation and gay rights, so and more. So yeah, thank you again, and may we all go forth with greater faith in our capacity to integrate our different perspectives into a bigger picture of reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Again, to check out the latest format and learn more about Synthesis Media's anti-debate, head to anti-debate.org. Thank you.